The cell door closes. The volunteer steps forward. Love, in the end, becomes a choice made in the dark. Subscribe if you love Jesus. The photograph survives, grainy and stark. A man in a cassock stares into the lens with eyes that seem to measure eternity against the weight of a single moment. His face is lean, angular, marked by years of privation and prayer. Behind those eyes lies a question that will echo through the decades. What does it mean to love unto death when death is all that remains to give? His name was Maximilian Maria Kolbe. The world would remember him by the choice he made in Block 13 of Auschwitz concentration camp in the summer of 1941. But the path to that moment began decades earlier, continents away, in a world not yet shadowed by the machinery of industrial murder. He was born Rajmund Kolbe on January 8, 1894, in the village of Zdunska Wola, a textile town in the Kingdom of Poland. Then, under Russian occupation, his parents, Julius and Maria, were weavers who knew poverty and faith in equal measure. The Poland of his childhood was a country erased from maps, partitioned among empires, its language suppressed, its faith tested in such soil, devotion either withered or grew deep roots. Records show that at age 13, young Rajmund experienced a vision of the Virgin Mary holding two crowns, one white for purity, one red for martyrdom. She asked which he would accept. Tradition holds that he chose both. Whether the vision occurred precisely as later hagiography suggests, scholars debate, but the trajectory of his life suggests he lived as though the choice had been made and sealed. In 1907, Rajmund and his older brother Francis entered the conventual Franciscan seminary. 3 years later, Rajmund took his vows and the name Maximilian, the Franciscan ideal. Poverty, humility, radical identification with Christ's suffering shaped everything that followed. He was sent to Rome for advanced studies in philosophy and theology, earning doctorates in both disciplines. By 1915, Europe was already burning. The Great War ground young men into mud from Flanders to the Carpathians, and the old certainties were collapsing. While in Rome, Kolbe founded the Militia Immaculata, the Army of the Immaculate, a movement dedicated to evangelization and devotion to Mary. His vision was expansive, almost naively ambitious. A global network of evangelists using every modern tool, printing presses, radio, eventually even aviation, to spread the gospel. In an age of ideologies, he proposed a counter-ideology rooted not in power, but in surrender. He returned to a reborn Poland in 1919. The nation had regained independence after a century and a half of partition, but independence came with upheaval, border wars, political chaos. Kolbe threw himself into publishing. In 1922, he launched a monthly magazine, Rycer's Niepokalanej, Night of the Immaculate. It began with 5,000 copies printed on borrowed equipment. Within a decade, circulation exceeded 700,000, making it one of the most widely read Catholic periodicals in the world. Contemporary reports suggest Kolbe worked with manic intensity, sleeping little, driving himself and his friars relentlessly. In 1927, he established Niepokalanów, the City of the Immaculate, a Franciscan monastery and publishing complex near Warsaw. At its height, it housed nearly 800 friars and operated a modern print shop, a radio station, and a fire brigade. The place hummed with machinery and prayer. Kolbe's vision was incarnational. Sanctify the world by engaging it. Baptize technology in the service of truth. In 1930, his superiors sent him to Japan. He arrived in Nagasaki with 4 friars, no money, and minimal Japanese. Within a month, they published the first issue of Seibo no Kishi, Night of Mary. He built a monastery on the outskirts of the city, on a plot of land others considered worthless, tucked into a hillside. Records note that when the atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki in 1945, 4 years after Kolbe's death, the hillside shielded the monastery from the blast the friars survived. He returned to Poland in 1936, his health broken by tuberculosis, his body worn thin by years of labor. He resumed leadership of Nepomuchanów, but the horizon was darkening. Adolf Hitler had consolidated power in Germany. The Nuremberg laws had codified anti-Semitism into state policy. The annexation of Austria and the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia signaled the coming storm. On September 1, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. The war came with mechanized speed and calculated brutality. By the end of the month, Warsaw had fallen. Poland was divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, erased once more from the map. For the second time in Kolbe's life, his nation ceased to exist. The Nazis arrested Kolbe on September 19th, along with 36 other friars from Nepomuchanów. They were imprisoned briefly, released, arrested again. The monastery became a refugee center, sheltering thousands of displaced Poles and Jews. Fleeing the German advanced scholars debate the exact numbers, but testimonies from survivors suggest Nepomuchanów harbored as many as 3,000 refugees during the early months of the war, including approximately 1,500 Jews. Kolbe understood the risk. The Reich's intentions toward both the Catholic Church and the Jewish people were not ambiguous. On February 17, 1941, the Gestapo arrested Kolbe for the last time. The charge, vaguely recorded, involved underground publishing and sheltering enemies of the Reich. He was transferred to Pawiak prison in Warsaw, then on May 28 to Auschwitz, designated prisoner number 16670. Auschwitz in the summer of 1941 was not yet the extermination center it would become. The gas chambers at Birkenau were still under construction, but the camp was already a place of systematic degradation and death, a laboratory for cruelty. Prisoners were worked to exhaustion, starved, beaten for infractions real and invented. Survival was measured in weeks, sometimes days. Kolbe was assigned to brutal labor details, hauling logs, constructing buildings, moving stones. Guards singled him out for abuse. Contemporary accounts from fellow prisoners describe him being beaten for assisting other inmates, for moving too slowly, for the cassock he had worn before his arrest. Witnesses recall that he refused to retaliate or complain, that he prayed for his tormentors, that he heard confessions in whispers at night in the barracks. Then came the end of July. A prisoner from Block 14 escaped. The camp commandant, SS Hauptsturmführer Karl Fritsch, ordered a reprisal. 10 men from the same block would be selected to die by starvation in the underground bunker. A slow, agonizing death intended as a deterrent. The entire block was assembled. Fritsch walked the lines, pointing at random. One of those selected was Franciszek Gajowniczek, a Polish army sergeant as his name was called. Gajowniczek cried out. Records preserve his words, documented later in testimony. "My poor wife, my poor children." From the ranks, a prisoner stepped forward. It was Kolbe. He removed his cap, a gesture of respect required in the presence of SS officers. He spoke calmly, asking to take Gajowniczek's place. Fritsch, reportedly surprised, asked who he was. Kolbe answered that he was a Catholic priest. Fritsch asked why he wanted to die. The answer, as documented in multiple post-war testimonies, was simple. "I am old, he has a wife and children." Fritsch agreed. The mathematics of death were indifferent to sentiment, but perhaps novelty interested him. Or perhaps the exchange simply required less effort than refusal. Kolbe was assigned to the starvation cell in place of Gajowniczek. 9 other men accompanied him into the underground bunker, Block 11, cell number 18. The men condemned to starvation were stripped and locked in darkness. No food, no water. The intent was to make death as drawn out and dehumanizing as possible. To break the spirit before the body failed, camp guards expected screams, fighting over drops of moisture, madness. Instead, from cell 18, they heard prayers. Camp interpreter Bruno Borgoviec, who brought the daily inspections, testified later that Kolbe led the men in hymns and the rosary. While the other condemned men grew delirious and savage with thirst, Kolbe remained lucid, comforting the others, praying over those who died. Borgoviec's testimony, recorded during the beatification process, describes Kolbe's face as serene, even radiant, though his body wasted away. One by one, the men died. After 2 weeks, only 4 remained alive, Kolbe and 3 others. The cell was needed for new victims. On August 14, 1941, a camp physician, sometimes identified in records as SS Obersturmführer Hans Bock, entered the cell and administered lethal injections of carbolic acid. Kolbe, the last conscious, extended his arm for the needle. Witnesses report he died with his eyes open, looking upward. His body was cremated the following day, August 15th, the feast of the Assumption of Mary. The ashes were scattered, mingled with the ashes of thousands, irretrievable and unnumbered. Franciszek Gajowniczek survived Auschwitz. He lived until 1995, dying at the age of 93. For more than 50 years, he bore witness to the man who died in his place. He attended Kolbe's beatification in 1971 and his canonization in 1982, standing in St. Peter's Square as Pope John Paul II declared Maximilian Kolbe a saint and martyr of charity. Gajowniczek spent his remaining decades speaking to schools, churches, and historians, repeating the story until it became inseparable from his own identity. He never claimed to deserve what was given. He simply testified to what was. The canonization itself carried theological weight. The Church recognized Kolbe not merely as a martyr of faith, one killed for refusing to renounce Christ, but as a martyr of charity, killed because he chose to embody Christ's command, to lay down one's life for another. The distinction mattered. It affirmed that holiness could manifest not only in doctrinal fidelity, but in the radical, self-emptying love that requires no creed, only will. Poland, by the time of Kolbe's canonization, remained under communist rule, officially atheist, hostile to public displays of religious devotion. Yet the government permitted tens of thousands of Poles to travel to Rome for the ceremony. The regime understood, perhaps, that Kolbe belonged to the nation's story, that his death represented something the state could neither claim nor suppress, a defiance that transcended politics, a witness that no ideology could erase. The legacy of that moment in Block 13 extends beyond one man or one nation. Auschwitz became the symbol of the 20th century's darkest capacities, the place where industrial efficiency wed itself to genocidal intent. More than 1 million people, most of them Jews, perished there. The camp's name became shorthand for the absolute negation of human dignity, the reduction of persons to numbers, ash, silence. Yet within that abyss, the story of Maximilian Kolbe endures as a counter-testimony. It does not redeem Auschwitz. Nothing redeems Auschwitz. It does not erase the mountains of shoes, the piles of hair, the ledgers of extermination. But it stands as evidence that even in the heart of absolute evil, the human will retains the capacity for absolute love. The choice to die so another might live does not explain suffering or justify atrocity. It simply asserts that love remains possible when nothing else does. Theologians and historians continue to examine Kolbe's life, parsing the line between heroism and sanctity, interrogating the narratives that grew around him. Some note that his pre-war writings occasionally reflected the casual anti-Semitism common in Polish Catholic circles of the era, even as his actions during the war demonstrated solidarity with Jewish refugees. The tension is not easily resolved. Saints are not abstractions. They are human beings who carry the contradictions of their time and place, whose holiness consists not in perfection, but in the willingness to be transformed by grace, to surrender ego and self-preservation when the moment demands. Niepokalanov survived the war, was suppressed under communism, and revived after 1989. It remains a functioning Franciscan monastery and pilgrimage site. The printing presses no longer run, but the chapel where Kolbe celebrated Mass still draws visitors who come to kneel in the presence of something difficult to name. An absence that feels like presence. A silence that speaks. Cell 18 in Auschwitz is preserved as a memorial. Flowers are often left there, small tokens placed against stone walls that once witnessed the slow extinguishing of 10 lives. Pilgrims stand in the narrow corridor and try to imagine the darkness, the thirst, the hymns echoing in the blackness. Most fail. The imagination cannot fully enter that place, but the attempt matters. Memory is a form of resistance, a refusal to let the dead vanish into the efficiency of forgetting. The question Kolbe's life poses is not primarily about heroism. Heroism can be admired from a distance, compartmentalized as the province of exceptional souls. The question is simpler and more terrible. When the cell door opens and the choice is placed before you, what will you do? Will you step forward or step back? Will love prove stronger than the instinct for survival? Or will survival win, as it does in nearly every case? Because survival is the baseline logic of existence? Most of us will never face that choice in such stark terms. We will not stand in a camp, will not hear the commandant's voice, will not watch a man weep for his children. But the structure of the choice recurs in smaller, quieter forms throughout every life. The decision to absorb cruelty rather than return it. The choice to forgive when bitterness would be easier. The willingness to sacrifice comfort, security, reputation for the sake of another whose name we may not even know. Maximilian Kolbe's witness does not demand that we replicate his martyrdom. It asks only that we recognize the grammar of love he demonstrated, that love is a decision enacted in the body, made real through the flesh. It is not sentiment or abstraction. It is the step forward when every instinct screams to step back. It is the extended arm when the needle approaches. It is the prayer sung in darkness when silence would be easier. The machinery of evil is efficient, relentless, indifferent. It grinds forward with bureaucratic precision, reducing persons to problems, lives to logistics. Against that machinery, love is small, fragile, seemingly insignificant one man, one choice, one cell in an archipelago of cells. Yet the machinery is dust now. The Reich that claimed 1,000 years lasted 12. The camps are museums, the ashes are scattered, and the story remains. It remains because something in the human heart recognizes that the step forward matters more than survival, that the choice to die so another might live is the truest thing we can do. The act that most clearly reflects whatever image of God we carry within us. It remains because witness endures when power does not. In the end, there is only the cell, the volunteer, and the love that would not be silenced. That love, once offered, cannot be revoked. It enters the world and becomes part of the world's fabric, a thread woven into the long testimony of those who chose the harder path, the one that leads through death into something beyond names. Maximilian Kolbe stepped forward on a summer day in 1941, and in stepping forward, made visible the light that darkness cannot extinguish.